Picture the first gray hair. You spot it in the mirror one morning. A single silver thread where there wasn't one before. Maybe you pluck it. Maybe you sigh and reach for a box of dye. Either way, you're having a very old thought. Because a man standing at a polished bronze mirror 2,000 years ago, in Rome, had the exact same reaction. The same small jolt. The same reach for something to paint the gray away. He mixed up a dark paste, worked it through his hair with a comb, and watched the white slowly disappear. He believed he was simply hiding his age. What he did not know, what nobody on earth could have known, was that inside every strand of his hair, that paste was quietly assembling something so small and so perfectly formed that the rest of the world would not learn how to build it on purpose for another 19 centuries. He was, without the faintest idea he was doing it, practicing a science that wouldn't even have a name until our own lifetimes. When you think of hair dye, you probably think of something modern, a wall of boxes at the drugstore, a brand name, a salon appointment. It feels like a 20th century invention, chemistry in a bottle, the product of a giant industry. In fact, it is one of the oldest cosmetic technologies our species has, and the trail runs back thousands of years, into tombs and temples and the recipe books of people who owned no microscopes at all. Begin in Egypt, and begin with a shrub. Its name is Lawsonia inermis, though you know it better as henna. Crush its leaves, and they release a reddish-orange molecule called lawsone that grabs onto the keratin in hair, skin, and nails and stains it a warm copper. It bonds so stubbornly that a henna stain doesn't wash off. It has to grow out. The Egyptians used it on all of it. Archaeologists have found mummies with henna-reddened hair and henna-darkened fingertips, and the practice reaches deep into the Predynastic period, well before 3000 BC. I'll be honest that exact dates for the very earliest use are slippery, because plant dyes fade and organic evidence is fragile. But henna is, as far as we can tell, one of the first substances a human being ever used to deliberately change the color of their hair, and the very same paste is still painted onto skin and hair across North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia today. That makes it, quite possibly, the longest continuously used cosmetic on the planet. And we can put a famous face to it. When scientists examined the mummy of Ramesses II, the pharaoh who ruled for 66 years and died an old man somewhere around 90, they found something oddly touching. In a study published in 1985, in the scholarly volume Momie de Ramsès II, the forensic expert Pierre Ceccaldi analyzed hairs taken from the mummy's scalp. By the time Ramesses died, his hair had gone white, but the strands were stained a reddish yellow, and Ceccaldi determined the color came from henna. Under the microscope, the roots gave up a secret. In his youth, Ramesses had been a redhead. Now, whether that henna was applied by the pharaoh in life to cover his gray, or by the embalmers afterward to restore his youthful color for eternity, is genuinely debated. But either way, 3,000 years ago, someone looked at white hair and reached for a plant to fix it. Here is where vanity turns into something stranger, and where we move from Egypt to Greece and Rome. Because the Greeks and Romans were, frankly, obsessed with their hair, and they were willing to put astonishing things on their heads to control its color. To a Roman, gray hair wasn't a neutral fact of getting older. It advertised that your strongest years were behind you, in a society that prized youth, vigor, and the look of authority, and so men and women alike went to war against it. We know this in vivid detail because a Roman named Pliny the Elder wrote it all down. In his enormous encyclopedia, The Natural History, finished around the year 77, Pliny records the beauty recipes of his day, and some of them are the stuff of nightmares. To dye hair black, one recipe called for leeches left to rot in red wine, in a lead vessel, for 40 days, then smeared onto the hair out in the sun. Other recipes darkened hair with a paste built around lead. Roman women who wanted to go the other direction, toward blonde, had their own methods, and that brings us to a genuinely revealing bit of history. The Romans prized blonde and red hair precisely because it was foreign. Blonde was the hair of the Gauls and the Germanic tribes to the north, exotic and a little wild, the coloring of the barbarian. As the scholar Elizabeth Bartman detailed in a 2001 study in the American Journal of Archaeology, wealthy Romans lightened their hair with saffron and harsh plant washes, and when dye wouldn't do, they simply bought the real thing. Blonde hair was literally imported from the heads of captured northern Europeans and woven into wigs so that a fashionable woman in Rome could wear the hair of a conquered enemy as a status symbol. There was even a pale, soap-like pomade called sapo, brought in from Gaul, used to give the hair a reddish tint. Some of those bleaching treatments were so caustic that they burned the hair until it fell out, which only fed the booming trade in wigs even further. Hair color, in Rome, was never just vanity. It was a way of signaling wealth, fashion, and who had conquered whom. Now the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming until 2006. Remember that black Roman hair dye built around lead, the one described in the old Greco-Roman texts? A paste of lead oxide and lime worked into graying hair over repeated applications? A team of French scientists led by Philippe Walter, working with researchers from the cosmetics company L'Oréal and the Argonne National Laboratory in the United States, decided to actually reconstruct it and look at what it does under the most powerful microscopes we have. They mixed the ancient paste, applied it to blonde hair, and watched. What they found, published in the journal Nanoletters, is astonishing. The lead in the paste reacts with sulfur, which is naturally present in the keratin proteins of your hair. That reaction grows tiny crystals of a compound called lead sulfide, or galena, directly inside each strand. And those crystals are not scattered at random. They line up in orderly strings along the hair's internal fibers, and they are minuscule, averaging just under 5 nanometers across. To put that in perspective, a nanometer is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. 5 nanometers is roughly the size of the quantum dots that materials scientists carefully engineer today in high-tech labs, for television screens and medical imaging. The Romans were growing structures of almost exactly that size, out of the same material, inside their own hair, using a paste that anyone could mix at home. Put it another way, you could line up more than 10,000 of those crystals across the width of a single strand of hair and still have room to spare. That's not cosmetics. That's chemistry. Nanochemistry, run entirely by accident, by people who had never heard of an atom, let alone a nanometer. And strikingly, the method was gentle. Walter's team noted that it blackened the hair without wrecking it, because the crystals grew in the spaces around the keratin, instead of tearing it apart, which is more than you could say for the caustic bleaches the same culture poured on their heads. They could see the result, black hair, and they had no possible way of knowing that the real action was unfolding at the scale of billionths of a meter. Before we go further, there's a catch, and it's worth being honest about it. It's tempting to push the story of hair dye all the way back into the Stone Age, and people do. We know that humans were grinding red ochre into powder at least 100,000 years ago. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found a genuine 100,000-year-old ochre processing kit, complete with an abalone shell used to mix the paint, described by Christopher Henshelwood and his team in the journal Science in 2011. We know ochre was smeared on bodies, and it is entirely plausible it went into hair too. But plausible is not proven. We have no direct, surviving evidence of a Stone Age person coloring their hair, because hair and pigment simply do not last that long. So the honest boundary is this. Deliberate hair dye is at least as old as ancient Egypt, and the ochre hints tease at something far older, but there the trail goes cold. And here is the part that should make you look twice at your own bathroom shelf. That ancient lead recipe never actually went away. For decades, so-called progressive hair dyes sold in ordinary American drugstores, products like the well-known Grecian formula, worked on precisely the same principle. The active ingredient was lead, in the form of lead acetate, and it darkened gray hair gradually with each use, by forming lead sulfide, the exact same compound, the same galena, the same reaction with the sulfur in your keratin, that the Romans stumbled into 2,000 years earlier. Regulators had allowed lead levels in these products as high as 6,000 parts per million. Lead is a neurotoxin, and it can rub off onto the hands and onto anything a person touches, which is exactly why public health advocates fought to get it out of something people massage into their scalps every few days. It was only in 2018 that the United States Food and Drug Administration finally moved to ban lead acetate from hair dye, with the rule taking full effect in 2022. Manufacturers have since reformulated, largely swapping the lead for the metal bismuth. In other words, the Roman formula was quietly on sale in the 21st century until almost the day before yesterday. So let's pull the whole thing together. A pharaoh with henna in his white hair, a Roman woman wearing the blonde scalp of a conquered enemy on her head. A black dye that turns out to be an accidental nanotechnology. And a recipe that survived, chemically unchanged, all the way from Pliny's encyclopedia to a shelf at your local pharmacy. Different centuries, different continents, the same three-part story every time. A person, a mirror, and a substance chosen to bend how old they looked. Here is the twist that ties it all up. Hair dye was never really about looking pretty for its own sake. From the very beginning, it was about time and status, about hiding the gray that announces your age, and about signaling who you are and where you rank among everyone else. The Egyptians did it. The Romans did it. And they did it with chemistry so far ahead of their own understanding that we only caught up to what they were really doing within the last 20 years. Which means the impulse itself is ancient, far older than any bottle or brand. The urge to look at the evidence of your own aging and decide, no, not yet, I will change this, is one of the most human things there is, and it runs thousands of years deep. So the next time you're standing at that mirror, holding that first gray hair between two fingers, deciding what to do about it, know that you are only the newest member of a very old club. Somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of women in the United States and Europe color their hair, and plenty of men do too, and every single one of them is repeating a gesture that Ramesses made, that a Roman at a bronze mirror made, that someone in a mud brick house on the Nile made before the pyramids were even finished. You reach for the box. They reached for the henna, or the leeches, or the lead. The tools changed. The wish, exactly, did not. And if you ever used one of those old gray-covering dyes before 2018, then you weren't just coloring your hair. You were running a 2,000-year-old Roman recipe and quietly growing tiny crystals inside your own hair without ever once knowing their name. All the research is linked in the description.